Hey, my name is Ben. Thanks for stopping by. In this video, I'm going to be showing you guys how to add refrigerant to a freezer or refrigerator. It's a very similar process either way, and we're specifically talking about R134A units, not units that are with the new refrigerants, which are like a propane-based refrigerant that is flammable. So we're not talking about those, and those are something that are fairly new still, and I'm even really not familiar with what the best options are for repair with those. But a lot of units out there, especially older ones that you're going to be working on, are still going to be R134A. That's the other thing I would mention too, is if you're looking for a refrigerator or freezer, I would try to find one that is still R134A and not the new propane-based refrigerants, although I think that's going to become more and more difficult as time goes on. So the particular freezer that we're working on today is a frost-free freezer, meaning it goes through defrost, and this thing has a leak somewhere. Now previously I did charge this thing up probably about 3 years ago, and it has ran fine up until now. As you can see though, it has now gotten to the point where this thing is running at a higher temperature than it should. You can see right now it's at 23 degrees Fahrenheit, and it's not pulling down to that 5 or 10 below zero that we would like to see. And that leads me to talking about what your philosophy is regarding how you want to repair the refrigerator. The best option obviously is to find the leak, fix the leak, and then charge the unit back up again. Now when you have such a tiny minuscule leak that like we have in this particular unit, where it took several years for the refrigerant charge to leak out, even though there's only a few ounces in the system, that leak is going to be very close to impossible to find, and probably even more difficult to fix, especially if it's in like the sidewalls or some place that you can't really access very well. So if you're okay with the inconvenience of it, you can use a refrigerator like this by just adding some refrigerant once every few years. And that's exactly what we're going to be doing today, is we're going to recharge this thing back up a little bit so that it's good to go for the next 3 years again. Right here is that label that I was talking about. You can see it is marked R134A, and it gives us our manufacture date of 2010, March 15th. And you can see it gives us our oil charge in ounces, as well as our R134A charge in grams. And I converted that back to ounces again, and that's 4.2 ounces of R134A. So once you know that it's a 134A unit, you can continue on your process of possibly charging it up. But the first thing that I would like you to do before then is to make sure the compressor is for sure running. You should be able to put your hand on the compressor while it's plugged in and feel that it is vibrating and sounds like there's a motor turning inside of it. And you should also be able to feel on the discharge and inlet pipes that they are different temperatures. So this is our discharge line, and that is warmer to the touch than the line coming back. So we know that this compressor is at least operating and compressing, because if it's not compressing and it's not running, you wouldn't have that temperature differential and the compressor wouldn't be vibrating. A symptom of a compressor that is bad is that it clicks and then clicks off again, and it'll just keep doing that over and over again every couple of minutes, and that means that the compressor is locked. And if that's the case, it's not worth tapping into the system and trying to fix it. Once you know that you want to access the system and check the refrigerant charge, you will have to add a line tap, as we typically call them, or a bullet piercing valve. I will link them in the description of this video. If you click on that little triangle, you should be able to see the link there to where you can purchase one of these. As you can see, this one has already been installed, but I have made a video previously about how to install one of these, so I'll make sure to link that in the description as well as at the end of this video. But you'll have to go ahead and get a line tap installed, and when you install this, you basically crank this down on either side, and then right here in the middle, there's a little Allen piercing screw that you tighten down that punches a little hole in the copper pipe. And what you'll do is you'll tighten that down, it'll punch the hole in the pipe, and leave it tightened in, which will leave this valve assembly closed until we are ready to open it up to our gauges to be able to check the pressures. And that leads me to talking a little bit more about what tools you're going to need. You're going to need some sort of set of gauges. This is a very nice set of digital gauges. I'll link to these in the description, but I'll also link to some good standard basic ones that you can use for the exact same thing. So you need a set of gauges with a manifold so you can make your connection onto the freezer to check the pressure. And then you're also going to need some R134A refrigerant. You can see here that we have a large tank of it, but you can actually get R134A refrigerant for vehicles in the small cans, and I believe they sell the correct adapters to where you can even use those to charge your refrigerator. So I'll try to link to that stuff if I can in the description. And then you're also going to need some sort of a scale. This is a nice refrigerant scale. I'll link it in the description as well. But this is going to allow us to weigh in how much refrigerant we are adding to the system. Now before we make this connection here, I just wanted to explain a couple more things that you could check. The first one is to make sure that the coil inside of the unit is not all iced up. If it's totally frozen, then it can seem like it's low on refrigerant when it's actually not. In this case, I know that that's not what we have going on, so that has been checked off the list for me. But make sure that if you have a frost-free freezer like this one, if that defrost timer for some reason failed, then you could end up with a huge accumulation of ice on the coil inside, and it would not cool properly. If you have a freezer like this one over here, which is kind of standard and the shelves themselves are refrigerated, where the refrigerant goes to the shelves, then that frosting up issue really is not as much of a concern. The next thing that you can check is just to see if the sides of the refrigerator are warm to the touch or not. So when this thing is operating, it rejects the heat through the condenser coil, which is located right underneath the outer skin of the freezer or refrigerator. And that's pretty standard. Sometimes they'll have a separate condenser down below, so if there's like a coil and a fan down there, then that's not exactly how this works. But in this case, it goes up into the sidewalls, and that's where it rejects all the heat from the unit. And so if the sidewalls are really nice and warm all the way around, the chances of it being low on refrigerant are not very high. Right now with this one, the sidewalls pretty much feel like they're ambient temperature almost everywhere, meaning that there's likely not enough refrigerant to condense in the walls of the unit to be able to adequately cool. So once you confirm that you do have the low refrigerant symptoms, then go ahead and install that valve. Like I said, I'll link to that for how to do that in the description, so you can jump over there and then come back if you need to. But then we're going to go ahead and access the system now and check the pressures. Now, as you can hear, the unit is running, and you will want the unit to be running while you add refrigerant. Now, it's very, very important that you pay close attention to the next part that I'm going to explain, and that is that most likely, if your unit is low on R134A refrigerant, it is going to be operating in a vacuum. So the low side pressure that we're going to be checking in a minute is actually going to have a negative pressure. And so when you connect your hose to it, it will suck air or moisture or whatever happens to be around it into the system, which is why we're going to go through the process of bleeding out the hose really well on our gauges so that there's fresh refrigerant all the way up to our access port, so that we don't accidentally end up pulling air or contaminants into the system. Now we're going to connect our center hose from our manifold over here to our jug of refrigerant. So this is the hose that is going to be providing refrigerant to the system. So we'll just go ahead and attach this on here, like so. And then we will, over here on our gauges, we will make sure that the hoses are tight on the back of the manifold, which is where our connections to the manifold are made. And then we'll make sure that our valves are closed, both the high and the low side valves. So make sure those are both closed right now. And now we should be safe to go ahead and turn this on. So we'll turn that on. So that's on and ready to go. So that weighs 32 pounds, 1.8 ounces. We're actually going to zero this out now. And what's going to happen is, as we charge refrigerant into the system, the scale is going to read a negative number, which will represent how much refrigerant has come out of the tank. Now back to our gauges, what we're going to do now is bleed out the air that was in these lines. So the valves on the actual hoses themselves have already been opened. You can see this valve is open, and the valve down on our tank there is open. So I'm just going to use the low side valve on my gauges to bleed a little bit of refrigerant out of this line so that we don't have any air or contaminants in those lines. Okay, I'm going to close the valve on my hose now. I also closed the valve up here. So if you don't have a valve on the end of your hose, I'm going to show you still how to bleed it out here in just a second, right when we're ready to connect it down to the system. That's pretty much all that we have to do for the setup. So let's go down and connect this to the actual unit. So since we have our line tap ready to go, all we're going to have to do is take the cap off right here, and that will give us access to this port. You can see right there. Make sure that the rubber gasket stays inside the cap and doesn't stick to the end of your access port. Now we'll take our hose and connect this onto here. Now I'll just show you, I'm going to open this up for now. There's going to be a little bit of gas in there. But I'm just going to loosely attach this. This is how you would do it if you didn't have a valve, or even if you do have a valve. It's good practice to do it this way. So we're going to get this started. Alright, we got it started there, but it's still loose. Now what we're going to do is we're going to actually open the valve on our low side here. It's going to allow refrigerant to come up from our R134A tank that we have attached, back down the blue hose and over to here, and bleed out the rest of the air that is in this hose and in this connection port area right here. So I'm just going to crack that a tiny bit, like that. And then while it's bleeding, I'll go ahead and attach this the rest of the way. And now we'll close the valve back up on our gauges. So now we are ready to access the system and check the pressure inside of the low portion of this compressor. And I guess that's the one other thing I should mention. For when you add your line tap, there's typically going to be a tag that comes off of the tank somewhere that's for the low side. There's almost always just one tag like this, and you can put your line tap on there. If for some reason you don't have access to this or yours doesn't have it, you can also put it on the actual low side line. So over here, there's the high side coming out, and this is the low side. In theory, you could put the tap right there as well if you needed to, but it's always best to add it directly to the can right here if at all possible. So from the previous time I added refrigerant, I saved my little Allen wrench that came with it. This is what we're going to use to open up that valve. If I can get it loose here. There it is. And right on the end of this line tap, there's a spot where we can insert this little Allen wrench right in the center here. So right now it's all the way closed, so this is all the way tightened. So it's right now the pressure that we're reading here is just showing us what's in this hose currently, so from bleeding out the refrigerant. So as soon as I open this, it will start to allow the little bit of refrigerant that's in the hose into the system, and then ultimately give us a reading of what's actually in there. So we'll go ahead and open that. You can see it started to come down in pressure already. It's a pretty small opening though, so it will take a second. I'm just going to open it a little bit more. So we'll just see what this comes down to. I'm guessing it's going to go into the negatives here momentarily. They're down to 16, 9, 7. Here we go. Here we are in the negative. So now it's showing us inches of mercury. So we're at almost 10 inches of mercury so far. So this thing is running in a vacuum currently, and that's why it's absolutely essential that you go through that bleeding process, because right now all it's doing is putting this hose, this blue hose, into a little bit of a vacuum, which is not going to hurt anything at all because this hose had R134A refrigerant in it ready to be pulled into the system instead of accidentally introducing air into the unit. Now is the fun part. We get to actually add our refrigerant. So we are all ready to go. We're connected, and the refrigerant from the tank is connected up to the center port of our gauges. And then as soon as we open this low side valve right here, it's going to introduce refrigerant into this blue line, which will start to charge the unit. Now we want to do this process very slowly because you don't want to flood the compressor with liquid refrigerant. So we're going to just very slightly open up this valve, and then we're going to watch how much refrigerant we've put into the system. Like I said already, we have 4.2 ounces is the total charge that this particular unit takes, and I think I'm going to put in around 4 ounces actually, which will probably leave us with a tiny bit of an overcharge. I'm guessing this system probably has about an ounce left in it right now, since this thing does have a very slow leak that every 3 years or so it ends up where it's not able to cool anymore. Alright, let's go ahead and add some refrigerant. So we'll just very carefully crack open this valve. Now as we add refrigerant, you'll see that the the weight over here is going to show a negative number. You can see we're at minus 0.5 ounces so far, and we're going to go all the way up to 4 ounces. The pressure showing on the screen right here is the pressure in this hose. It's not necessarily the pressure on the actual low side of the unit. These line taps have such a tiny opening into the system that it's actually kind of hard to like charge it too fast, because it almost acts as like a regulating device itself, not allowing too much refrigerant in all at once. If you were charging an air conditioner or some other appliance though, and you had a full size tap into the system, it's very likely that you could charge it too fast. Either way though, we're charging this at a very low rate using this low side valve right here, and typically it'll get cold right past the valve. So right here where I'm feeling with my fingers, this is cold to the touch because that liquid refrigerant is coming in right here and then evaporating as it goes into the blue hose. We're up to 2 ounces now, so we're halfway there. Oh, over here on my gauges, while that's working on that, right now it's in R134A mode, but we can actually go to R134A. Let's see if I can find it here. There it is. So R134A is going to give us an automatic readout for our vapor saturation temperature based on the current pressure of the system. So right now, 52 degrees is the vapor saturation temperature of basically the pressure inside of this hose. Once we stop adding refrigerant, this vapor saturation temperature will accurately represent what the VSAT of the system is at operating pressures. So you can watch that as I shut this off. It'll start to show us the actual evaporator temperature inside of this freezer. Alright, there we are. We're at 4 ounces. So I'll go ahead and close this valve. It was just barely open. And now our pressure will slowly drop to match the actual temperature inside of the unit once all of the refrigerant has gone into the system that is in this hose. Now at this point you will know whether or not you were successful based on the pressure of the unit. Since we added close to the factory charge, we know that this should not be running in a vacuum anymore after adding the refrigerant. If the unit is still running in a vacuum after adding close to the factory charge, most likely you're going to have some kind of an issue with the regulating device of the system, which is where the liquid line comes out right here. You can see it actually. The liquid line comes out of the exterior of the unit, and it goes through this little filter dryer, and then it comes out as this little tiny wire-like thing. This is called the capillary tube, and if this thing gets plugged, no matter how much refrigerant you add, it's not going to allow the refrigerant to circulate through the system. So if you add the factory charge to the unit and it's still running in a vacuum, most likely your capillary tube is plugged or your filter dryer is plugged, and then you have your work cut out for you, or you have to consider whether or not the unit is worth spending the time and money to repair. If, however, you're able to add refrigerant, just like we finished doing, and it ends up running at a pressure that is acceptable or basically above zero, you can see our vapor saturation temperature is now 2 below zero, and we know that our box temperature currently is around 20 degrees. So usually your vapor saturation temperature is going to run somewhere around 20 degrees colder than your box temperature. So as the freezer cools down, this number here will drop as well. But either way, if you're able to add the refrigerant and it starts working correctly like this, then you are going to be good to go. You will have a functional unit, and it should work for quite a long time. So if you have a unit that's kind of like mine, you're going to end up with a situation where the unit is going to work great for a number of years, and eventually you'll have to recharge it again. So it's pretty inconvenient, but to find this leak would be close to impossible. I've spent a lot of time trying to find leaks like this, and I very, very rarely have any success. The only time it really works to fix the leak is if you have a bad enough leak that you can actually trace it down. So if you add refrigerant like this and 2 weeks or a month later it stops working again, that's probably a leak you could find and fix. So that would definitely be worth checking into. If, however, it's a leak that is over several years, only losing a couple of ounces, then most likely your best option is either to just charge it up a little bit now and again, or just buy a different unit altogether. Now you guys didn't see it on camera, but I actually shut the valve off on this tank as it was about finished adding refrigerant, and I'm going to now just go ahead and add the last tiny bit of remainder refrigerant that's inside of these hoses by closing off the valve on the top of the tank here. like so, opening this valve. And then we'll just go ahead and add that tiny little bit of refrigerant that's left inside of these hoses into the unit. You got to be careful with this because these hoses can hold an ounce depending on the situation. These things are critically charged systems. You don't want to have a situation where you have it significantly overcharged or undercharged. So try to get these things as precise as possible when you're charging them. Especially in a situation where you've fixed the leak, then you want to get it to the exact factory charge and don't overcharge it at all, because most likely if the leak is actually properly fixed, that charge that you put into it will last the remainder of the life of the unit. And if you charge it incorrectly, it's not going to operate efficiently during that period of time. For my situation, if I'm about an ounce overcharged, that's not going to last very long. In about a year, it's going to be the perfect charge. A year after that, it's going to be an ounce low, and so on and so forth. But it's just something that I'm willing to work with in order to have a spare freezer at our place. And it's not the end of the world since I'm able to add a little bit of refrigerant once in a while. So now I'm going to go ahead and get everything disconnected and put back, and we should be good to go. So let's go ahead and disconnect everything. The valve on our refrigerant tank has already been closed, so we're good to go on that. Now we're going to close the valve on the actual unit. So I'm going to just crank this Allen connection down here, like so. Now I can just simply remove my hose, just like that. Now always put the hose back onto its holder right away so you don't get any contaminants into the system. And remove the hose from our refrigerant tank. And then we'll replace the cap onto our access port. And finally, take your little Allen wrench and put that somewhere where it will be readily accessible for next time. Hopefully there's not a next time in your situation, but for me, I know that in about 3 years, we'll be back here doing the same thing. I should probably just buy a new unit. Hopefully that gave you a good overview of the process of adding refrigerant to an R134A appliance. It's pretty similar for any appliance, whether it be a refrigerator or a freezer or even other appliances that use R134A. If it's a sealed system where you have to add a line tap and it uses a capillary tube as a regulating device, that process is going to be pretty similar. So if you found this to be helpful, I'd appreciate it if you do me a favor, hit that thumbs up button so it helps more people find this video, and comment down below with any thoughts or suggestions that you might have for this. If there's something that I happen to miss in this video, a lot of times there's some really smart people that will correct me in the comment section, so definitely check that out because it can be both entertaining and informative in the comments. Again, links in the description to the different products and tools and things that you might need for this particular project. If you do click on one of those links, a tiny percentage of your purchase goes to help support the channel at no extra cost to you. So if you do use those links, I really appreciate it. Alright, if you guys want to keep learning with me, I'm going to put a couple of videos here on the screen for you to choose from, including that one where I install the line tap on I think it's an air conditioner actually for that particular situation. So we'll see you over there in just a few seconds. The sides of this thing are now nice and hot. When we started the video, we were at 24 degrees. We've already dropped 10 degrees all the way down to 14. See you later.